Alright, so today we're checking out the new DJI O3 air unit. There's a lot to unpack in this video, so before asking questions, please watch the whole video as many of your questions will likely be answered in the video. In my opinion, the O3 air unit is a game changer. I don't use that term often on my channel in many videos, but this one truly opens up a whole new world, especially for those of you that are sub 250 protagonists. I'll explain what I mean throughout the video, as there are many aspects that combine together to support my opinion. It's not just one thing. So let's talk about the technical specs first, and then I'll get into the performance discussion. So DJI sent me the O3 air unit, which I have already installed here in this Chimera V2 frame. They sent me the remote controller V2, or they call this the remote controller 2. And then they sent me the Goggles 2. The O3 air unit can also connect to the DJI FPV Goggles V2, but I don't own those and I did not test those. The remote controller 2 and the Goggles 2 are the same ones that came with the Avata. As you guys already know, I never got the Avata to review and did not buy one, so some of the information about the Avata I'll talk about is secondhand knowledge that is already out in the public. In a nutshell, the DJI O3 air unit is a modification of the air unit from the Avata. The O3 air unit with camera, cable, and antenna weighs 40 grams. By comparison, the V1 system weighs about 53 grams. And again, for reference, here are all the dimensions of the air unit, the antenna, the connector cable, and the cable between the camera. This is just for your reference. And also the dimensions for the camera itself. The antennas on the air unit are omnidirectional 2T, 2R dual band antennas. There are two micro FL connectors on the air unit going to a single plastic enclosure. I assume that there are two antenna elements inside. However, iFlight has utilized two separate antennas with SMA adapters in their upcoming Evoke F6 model, which is this one here. I'll have a video on this model later on, but I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to be releasing it. The air unit comes with a 6-pin connector plug with the same pinout as the connector that came with the Vista. And just for reference, here is what it looks like in the manual, and you can see that's got the same 6 pins. So putting the air unit in this Chimera V2 was a really simple swap in. As you can see here, there's the plug, and I literally unplugged the Vista that was in here and then plug this into the same. It's actually got the same pinout, so nothing needs to be changed, and the air unit is right there in the back. And you can see here that the air unit does have a micro SD card slot as well as a USB-C connector. It does come with 20 gigabytes of onboard storage, so you don't actually need to have a micro SD card in here, so if you forget it or lose it, you can still record to the 20 gigabytes that are on board. Also, the 20 gigabytes of storage is accessible. Actually, both the onboard and the micro SD card storage is accessible via the USB-C connector to your computer, and the storage mode is powered by USB power only. You don't have to power up the whole air unit via your LiPo battery to access the storage that's internal. And of course, you can always eject the micro SD card and plug into your computer if you need to access the files. So the O3 air unit now supports Betaflight Canvas mode. So you can get the full Betaflight OSD if you enable Canvas mode in the CLI. It works in the same way as it has in the past. I'm told it only officially supports Betaflight firmware, so in terms of iNav, KISS, and other firmware that's out there, it might or might not work. It's probably not going to work properly, and it's not officially supported. The advertised max range on the O3 air unit is 10 kilometers for FCC regions. In comparison, the V1 system was advertised for 4 kilometers of range. Now, I did create this mounting system here for the air unit because there is no actual way to mount this to existing quads. Obviously, there's probably going to be modifications, or new frames are going to have ways to mount this, of course, but this is something simple I've created where I can just use the screws for the Vista, the 20x20 mounting here, and that just screws into the TPU that holds the air unit, and it's been working out pretty well. I haven't had a lot of crashes because I haven't been, haven't gone bando bashing with this one yet, but this works just totally fine and it's fairly secure. I'll put a link to the STL file if you want to download that in the video description. So it's really important that the air unit gets adequate air cooling inside the drone. If there's not enough airflow, the air unit will overheat. The O3 air unit is 40% smaller with a 40% increase in power consumption, so it will overheat if not allowed to properly cool while in the air. On the bench, I've gotten it to overheat just sitting there with no air cooling in as little as 5 minutes. However, for my mounting setup here, I did not experience any overheating incidents in about 2 months of flying. Okay, so there's a lot of rumors out there. One of them, one of the kind of the big rumors is that there's another version of the Goggles 2 called the Goggles 2 Lite. I can't confirm or deny that those exist. I can tell you that I don't have those. I have not tested those. Regarding a bunch of the other rumors out there, and honestly, there's so many different kind of rumors and leaks and stuff that are out there. I can't obviously address all of them. So again, I stress that you watch the whole video, and what you see in this video is what is actually known from my testing. So the O3 air unit currently only works with the controller 2 in the FPV Goggles V2 and the Goggles 2. So this is the Goggles 2, which is quite a bit smaller than the first gen system, and that was the FPV Goggles V1 and the FPV Goggles V2. But this O3 air unit does not work with the FPV Goggles V1, only with the V2, and that's I think also the same way it works with the Avata. The Avata works with the FPV Goggles V2, but not the V1. Now another rumor is that they're going to make DJI is going to make the Goggles 2 backwards compatible with the first gen air unit, like the V1 air unit, and they did tell me that they are working on that, but they did not give me any kind of a timeline or a release date. So eventually this will probably work with the V1 system, the V1 air unit and the Vista, but right now the firmware doesn't support it. So there's already a lot of videos on the controller 2 and the Goggles 2, so I'm not going to go into like full in-depth videos on these. I'm just going to cover them briefly and how it's relevant to FPV drones. If you're looking for more in-depth videos, there's already probably hundreds of videos on YouTube, so you can search for them if you have any specific questions that aren't answered in the section I'm going to provide here. So the remote controller 2 comes out of the box with a centered throttle stick, so you have to remove this back cover here on this side to get access to 2 different screws. I think the F2 screw is the one you want to use. You want to, turn it clockwise, and that will release the stick so that it'll be floating. And then there's another screw, I think it's F1, where you can, loosen it or counterclockwise, and that will adjust the spring tension, I believe, in the yaw axis here. And you can do the same on the other side to adjust the spring tension on the right stick. So obviously you're going to want to do that first because most FPV drones aren't using a centered throttle like you do on a lot of DJI camera drones, so make sure you do that. Now, in terms of the different aux channels, that when if you're using this bound to the O3 air unit that's connected obviously to the S bus here, the aux channels are, I think, fixed. I don't think you can adjust them, at least currently. The different switches are going to be like this. So they're obviously, some of these buttons obviously for camera drones, like this is for the Avata. I think you can use this for the original FPV drone as well. So you have like the record button and stuff like this, the return to home, pause, etc., and then like the start and stop button. The aux channels are assigned as such. So this 3-position switch is channel 1. This is channel 2. These are not latching switches. They're just like toggle switches. So this one here is channel 3, this one here is channel 4, and the C1 is channel 5. So obviously you could probably use the start stop as arm and disarm, and it actually, even though it's not a latching switch, it's just a toggle switch, it acts like a latching switch in Betaflight. So when you click on it, it actually maintains that position, and you have to click on it again to go back to the previous position. So I considered using this one as my arm switch, but the way I hold as a thumber, my finger is right here, so it does kind of make it easy to quickly arm and disarm. But at the end, I was a little concerned that I might accidentally disarm, so I made the C1 button here, it's a custom button, as my arm and disarm button. And again, this one works like similarly. Even though it's a toggle switch, it actually acts as a latching switch in I guess the software inside the radio. So click it, it arms it. Click it again, it disarms it. All right, so let's take a look at the Goggles 2 here. So the Goggles 2 has the following specs. The screens in here are 1920 by 1080 micro OLED screens with a max refresh rate of 100 Hertz. The max brightness is 700 nits, and you can control the brightness in 100 nits increments from 100 to 700 nits. And since the O3 air unit can connect to this and the DJI FPV Goggles V2, the latency is a little bit different based on the frame rates. So at 1080p, 100 frames per second on the Goggles 2, you get about 30 milliseconds of latency. And at 1080p, 60 frames per second, you get about 40 milliseconds of latency. On the FPV Goggles V2, it's 810p at 120 frames per second with about 28 milliseconds of latency. And then 810p 60 frames per second with about 40 milliseconds latency. So again, I don't have the FPV Goggles V2. I wasn't able to test that, so I'm just going based on the data they sent me. And of course, in the O3 system, the video is transmitted in H.265, not H.264, so it's got better compression and better video quality, and the bitrate is up to 50 megabits per second. Now, regarding the low latency mode, I guess some of you guys are going to ask about how to activate that in this system. It's activated via the recording mode and under the higher frame rates. So if you want the lower latency mode, you're going to want to be recording in 100 frames per second or 120 frames per second if you have the FPV Goggles V2. And then when you record in the 60 frames per second mode, that's actually a little bit higher latency as mentioned earlier. Okay, so for the different recording modes, I'll go ahead and put them on screen here. And I will also show them a little bit later when I go through the menus on the goggle. Okay, so just a quick look at the goggle itself, and as you can see, I'm already using some third-party stuff here. I took off the stock cable, or actually I'm not using the stock cable, I'm not using the stock strap. I got third-party ones of those because this cable was kind of long and I was getting kind of tangled up and stuff, so I bought a separate system here. So I got this USB cable here that plugs into the battery, and then this plugs into this connector here is different from the first gen goggles, the V1 and V2, and then it's a shorter one as well, so I have it kind of wrapped around here through this third-party strap and plugged into the battery, which goes on the side of my head. It's okay. I probably will find something else later. This is better than the stock one, but I'm not sure if I want the battery here on the side of my head. I might find a different strap that moves the battery to the back of my head. I think that might be a little bit more comfortable. It's not terrible. Obviously, you got your, collapsible antennas here. These aren't removable, although I'm sure somebody will come up with a third-party solution at some point. And I believe there are two patch antennas here in the front, but I'm not 100% sure on that because I did not take this apart. But this goggle here, in terms of the size and the weight, significantly smaller and lighter than the first gen goggle. That alone does help make it so that you don't really need that third strap at the top, although I think it would help it with stability. I wish that they would have had that available as an option for people that want to use a strap or straps that have that third strap on the top of the head, just for extra security. But with goggles, it's very hard to know how this is going to work for you or not. I haven't heard too many complaints from people that have been flying the Avata. I know a lot of people fly the Avata now. Not a lot of people have been complaining a ton about the way this goggle fits on most people. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that it's not going to fit because everyone's face is different. For me, it's mainly the width of the side here that is trouble for me. It's a little bit too narrow because I've got a wider head. So it's more difficult for me to get my eyes closer to the lenses. So this is a little lens protector that's included. And when in order to see the whole screen, you got to get your eyes closer to the lens here because this is a smaller opening than the V1 goggle. And if your eyes are too far away, then the round edges of this little lens here is going to show up. You'll see a little vignetting in your video feed. So my biggest problem is, because this is narrower on my head, I'm not able to get my eyes closer to the lenses, so I do see a little bit of the circle on both sides, and that's a little bit of an issue for me. Now, if I press the goggle up against my head and my face really hard, and like if I tighten the strap down all the way, then that effect is reduced. But I think what I'm going to probably do is just remove this. This is basically some kind of silicone or rubber plastic, and it's latched on to the sides here. You can actually remove this part here, and I'm starting to see some third-party I guess foam and stuff that might be coming out. I might try that and see if I can get closer to the lenses, and that'll help. Now when I do that, now the image is pretty clear, except for the very, very far edges. Now I had the same problem on the V1 goggles as well. So I just reduced the size of the screen. I think I'm flying this with like an 80% screen size, just because I want to get all that image into the center of the frame. It doesn't really affect in terms of, doesn't really affect it negatively in terms of my ability to fly the drone. I can fly totally fine. It's just that the outside edges of the field of view are going to be blurry. And part of that, I think, is my astigmatism in my eyeglass prescription. So while you can see the diopter is adjustable from 2 to -8 on both, if you have astigmatism, you're probably going to need to get the some sort of prescription, and they do include these little frames to put prescription lenses into these, and you can stick these on here if you have pretty bad astigmatism. The adjustment mechanism is pretty interesting. So obviously you can adjust the diopter and the IPD via these dials here on the bottom. So like this one's loose and this one's locked. So to unlock it, you're going to rotate it counterclockwise and it'll pop down. And then you can adjust the diopter by rotating the dial like so, and then you can then slide the lens back and forth for your IPD adjustment. And then to lock it, you just push up on the little dial here and then twist it, and that'll lock it in place. And then you're not going to be able to move it. It won't slide around. You can't adjust it unless. Now the thing about this one is that it's kind of loose, so it's pretty easy to like get this knocked off, and then it'll just pop down like that. So you got to like push up and then tighten, and then pretty much tighten it down like fairly well so it doesn't accidentally get loose. But like I said, it's going to be very subjective whether or not this goggle is going to work for you or not, and the only way to know for sure is if you actually try it. Alright, so I want to quickly show you the menuing system inside the goggles. Obviously I'm recording the video output from the screen, or actually to my phone, and because it's kind of hard to see the actual screen, but this is actually one for one. What you get on here is what you see in the goggles. So there is actually a goggle tutorial you can go through that will show you how to use this touchpad. So basically you're going to swipe over from the left top or bottom to access the controls, and then use a series of taps or 2-finger taps. So a tap will select something and a 2-finger tap will go back. And by the way, I do have the air unit with a fan. I'm blowing air over it right now, otherwise it would be overheating. So we'll go ahead and access the settings. We'll swipe over from the left. And you can see here, I'm just going to go through each one by one quickly. And see here, air unit in low power state, unable to record video. If you want to switch to the Avata, you can do that here. The current firmware only supports the Avata and the O3 air unit. I think there was a rumored leak somewhere that showed this being able to connect the goggles to being able to connect to like a Mini 3, a Mavic 3, and the first gen air unit. I think that's something that they're working on, but that's something that I haven't tested. I don't have access to that. If you want to see the stuff that's recorded, you can click on here. It shows your album and what's currently recorded on the SD card. Go down to the next menu item, transmission. So this does have audience mode like the first gen system. You have to go in here and turn broadcasting to on, and then actually will reduce the transmission quality for the for the pilot itself. So it's probably not something that you're going to want to use. And obviously, it's showing their broadcast with 28B8 as I think the identifier for the goggle that's being broadcast. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off here. I've been flying everything in focus mode auto. You can turn that off if you don't like that. It works similarly to the first gen system where it kind of blurs the side of the image. But for me, the sides are already kind of blurry, so I just left it in auto is fine. Here you can change it from auto mode, the channel mode from auto to manual. I'll explain this a little bit later in the video and our testing when we're flying with other people. But you can see here, basically 5.8 gigahertz. You have this bandwidth option here. You can adjust it from 40, 20, and 10. So the more bandwidth, the better the video quality. If you have more pilots, you probably want to go down to this lower 10 megahertz. But I'll explain later why I think auto is probably better. So if you want to be using your goggles in audience mode, this is where you would go here, and then the other goggle would show up here if it's in broadcast mode. Here you can change the remote controller settings for the remote controller V2. You can go in here, you can change your mode from the stick mode from mode 1, 2, and 3. Obviously you have to make the changes in the back of the radio as well. If you want to calibrate your sticks, go over here to RC calibration. Currently I'm running a standard S-Bus protocol, but if you want to use the S-Bus fast, just select that. If you want to go through the goggles tutorial, click on this. Okay, so here in the camera settings, you can change things like your aspect ratio, 16:9 and 4:3, video quality. So these are all the available video modes, and you can see here there's 50, 60, and 100. There's no 24 or 30 FPS available, at least in the current firmware, where they're telling me that 30 FPS will be available in the future, but they're not sure when. So if you're going to be in 16:9 mode and running like 4K, I would recommend changing the field of view from wide to ultra wide to get the most field of view. Now, if you change it to ultra wide field of view, gyro flow does not work, so you want to be in wide field of view. And then for EIS, if you have EIS off, it records gyro data to the video file. But if you use Rocksteady instead, no gyro data is stored to the video file, but instead the video is stabilized in camera via Rocksteady. Okay, so here you can see the auto ISO limit. You can adjust that for less noisy video, but you want to really go down to your advanced camera settings here. And here you can change your color setting here. I prefer decentralized for the ability to adjust my colors in post, but if you like normal color better, it's actually pretty good. The default audio camera is pretty good. You don't have to really change anything, and it actually looks pretty decent. All right, moving on down to display. You can adjust your brightness here, 0 to 6. I think it's in 100 nits increments. For me, 4 is plenty bright because you're really close to the screen. So you can adjust it to your preference here. And then normally the air unit display scaling, I'll adjust that down to about 80%. That works pretty good for me. You can see here when you do that, the screen that's actually recorded in the DVR shrinks as well. So go back to 100% here, it'll be larger. You can see how that adjusts. And it also affects where the OSD shows on the DVR recording as well. And then this is just the latest, this is what shows you what the firmware I'm using here in terms of the air unit, controller, and the goggles. And here under more, you can use the goggles to connect to the smartphone app it's called DJI Virtual Flight. So if you're learning how to fly, it's a pretty good simulator. I haven't actually used it myself, but I've heard some pretty positive things about that. And then they have this wireless streaming option here. You can use this, I think, to use the DJI Fly app, which is actually what I'm using to transmit the video signal from the goggles to the phone. It's through the DJI Fly app, and then you can use that to wirelessly stream your flights to Facebook and other social media. I'm not exactly sure how that works. I haven't tested it. All right, so talking a little bit about the camera itself here. The CMOS sensor is a 1/1.7 inch 48 megapixel sensor. It's got 155 degree field of view and an f2.8 aperture. You can see here that the lens is huge. and it looks more like a lens from a GoPro or an action camera versus an FPV camera. So the camera module itself is 20 millimeters wide, just like the Gen 1 camera, but the nose is quite a bit shorter than the V1 camera. So your existing mounts on your drones are going to need to be modified. So on this one here, I actually had to cut the TPU because it was too long and it was coming into the sides of the field of view and show up in the video. So I actually just cut off that TPU. So obviously, whatever frame you're going to put it in needs to have the ability to move that lens forward and out of the way of the field of view of the frame, or so the frame doesn't get into the field of view. You're probably going to see a lot of the reviews where the frames are going to be basically blocking the left and right sides of the video. So I actually didn't want that to happen, so I put into this frame here with a TPU mount that I could modify, and it's worked out pretty well. So the camera uses the same ND filters that the Avata uses. In fact, I think this is the exact same camera module that's in the Avata. It has these little notches here for your ND filters. DJI makes, I think, a set. I think it comes with a 8, 16, and 32, I believe, is what's available. They didn't have any in stock at the time, so they weren't able to send me any, but I was able to contact Freewell, and they sent me their entire set of ND filters, and they just look like this. Pretty simple. They just snap into place. This one is their, I think, 8, 16, 32, and 64 ND filters, and then they've got a polarizing filter here, and then a UV filter here. And I definitely recommend using ND filters to get obviously better motion blur in your video, but I would get the UV filter and leave it on in case you're not going to be using the darker ND filters. Just to help with the lens flare. The lens flare on this camera without any filters in front is kind of harsh. I'll show you some examples here. And somewhat distracting, especially if you're watching the video on recording playback. So I've been pretty much using the UV filter all the time if I'm not using any of the ND filters, and that does smooth out that harshness of the lens flare. It's not as noticeable. It's actually quite pleasant looking. It's kind of a round oval and smaller. So I find that to be better. I definitely recommend at least getting the UV filter if you're not going to be using ND filters, just to get better recorded video. All right, so let's talk about the image quality of the system first. So the 1080p transmitted image is much nicer looking than the original V1 system. If your priority is image quality, the O3 system is by far the best by a mile over everything else. The DVR footage really doesn't do it justice. What you see in the goggles is much better looking than the DVR. And this assumes that you're able to focus on the screens properly, of course. So the latency of O3 feels about the same as the V1 system to me. There is no latency information displayed on the screen anywhere. The only metric is the bitrate. However, the way the system works is similar to the V1 system. As the signal strength degrades, it dynamically adjusts the latency and bitrate to provide the most optimal flying experience. However, I felt like the way it made the adjustments were a little bit less jarring than the V1 system. Even at very low bit rates, the image quality was still very good. Sometimes it was difficult to notice that the signal was degrading at all. The output power on O3 is not adjustable in the current firmware. The output power is adjusted dynamically in the background. There is no output power metric shown in the Goggles OSD as well. Additionally, DJI would not disclose what the max and min output power was on O3. I assume it's probably the same as the V1, but I have no way to measure it. The range and penetration of the O3 area I think is better than the V1 system, and I think it's better than anything else that's currently available on the market. I did a wide variety of range and penetration tests that are far too long to put in this video, but in summary, the over-the-air distance with clear line of sight is further than anything I've tested before, and the penetration performance through obstacles near the ground is also better than anything I've tested before. Here's an example of me flying behind some large buildings. Alright, so I'm going to try and go around these buildings here. I'm on the far corner. See how far around I can get before I lose video. Alright, so I'm pointing my goggles at the opposite corner of this building. Head that way. There's a series of buildings here, so we'll see how far I can get. Pretty good video here. The bitrate is dropping. I'm in full auto mode. Still 20, 30 megabits. So I'm able to go, this is the opposite corner of this first building. No problems getting around that first building. So I'm at the far end of this building over here. Yeah, bitrate's back up to 50. Let's go see how much further I can get into this series of buildings here before my video gets too bad to fly. So I'm going through this entire building here and further along. And now I'm dropping to about 14, 15 megabits. A little bit stuttery. So I'm going through a second building here. 7 megabits. 9. Yeah, I can definitely tell focus mode is kicking in here. 8 megabits, but I can still fly. 3, 4. It's very low. So I think this is about where I think I would, yeah, I'm getting very stuttery now, where I feel like I would turn around. So this is the second courtyard over here. So I'm going through this building here, and I'll put that distance up on the screen, how far I went before turning around. So that's basically 2 buildings here that I went through, the corner of that one, and then all the way through this one here. And we'll go ahead and bring it on back. Let's see how the original DJI system in Walksnail, how they'll handle this area here. So I'm going all the way back here to where I am right over here. I also ran the same test with the V1 system and Walksnail. The V1 system was not able to take me as far before the latency made it unflyable. The Walksnail system lost video completely when I attempted to go as far as the O3 system. I will make these full test videos available to my Patreons for comparison. So how does O3 work with other systems and flying with other pilots? Well, the answer is kind of complicated. First, I did a test with Umagod and flew with his O3 quad. When both flying in auto mode, the O3 system was able to determine on its own how to split up the 5.8 gigahertz band for best performance for both pilots. No need to figure out who is on what channel. This is all done in the background dynamically. If you want to control what channel a pilot is on, you can switch to manual mode and assign a channel to each pilot. Just be aware that when you do that, the control also goes to 5.8 gigahertz, whereas normally in auto mode, the control link is in 2.4 gigahertz, so that may affect your overall range with the control link. The starting bitrate in manual mode is lower and close to about 25 megabits for each pilot. And the performance for 2 pilots was slightly better in manual mode, but the difference is not huge. I don't know how O3 will perform with 3 or more O3 pilots flying at the same time. I was not able to test this. However, I think it probably would be best to stick to auto mode for everyone and let the system figure out the best way to split up the bandwidth dynamically in the background and give everyone the best experience. When flying O3 and the V1 system at the same time, it seems that the effect on the V1 is stronger compared to the other way around. When flying the O3 quad close to a V1 quad, the video performance gets worse for both, but the effect is much worse on the V1 system, while the O3 doesn't seem to show as much of an issue other than a drop in bitrate. When flying O3 and an analog FPV system at the same time, there is this constant noise pattern overlaid on the analog video feed. The noise does seem to be worse when the O3 air unit is closer to the analog video receiver. It's flyable, but very distracting. So shout out to JHO, one of my subscribers, for helping me out on the V1 and analog tests. Lastly, a word on the recorded video quality. I think the story here is incomplete. So in the released firmware, there's no 30 FPS or 24 FPS modes. Therefore, no 4K 4.3 mode is available, unlike you can get 2.7K and 1080p and in 4.3. I think I'm going to need to see how that mode performs with Gyroflow to get a complete picture of how this compares to GoPros. Obviously, the bitrate is very good in all the video modes. I think I've seen as high as 130 megabits in 4K 60, and that image quality is pretty good. It works pretty well with Rocksteady and Gyroflow, but the field of view is cropped since it's recording only the 16:9 crop sensor, so basically the top and bottom is chopped off. However, even in the 2.7K 60 FPS in the 4.3 mode, the video quality beats everything out there now except for GoPros. So with O3, you don't need to fly with an external camera unless you need or absolutely require the highest video quality like on a GoPro. This is why I think this is a game changer, especially for sub 250 gram quads. On my custom build here, I've got this down to about 250 grams, and this is with a 1000 milliamp hour battery and GPS. This is a 4-inch Chimera V2, and this battery gives me about 10 minutes of flight time, excellent FPV video performance, obviously with O3, and very good recorded video with Gyroflow, and I fly this mostly in 2.7K 60 with the 4.3 mode, so you get the full sensor, and Gyroflow dynamically stretches that video out to really give you some nice, quite comparable to GoPro quality footage if you compare it to say something like a Hero 8 in 2.7K. To me, it looks pretty similar. You have the ability to record in decine-alike mode or decine-alike color, so you can do color grading. But the built-in color grade, I guess the out-of-camera color grade in normal color mode is actually quite good. It's not overly saturated. It's a little bit more contrast than I would prefer, but I think most people would find it to be fine. The sharpness is okay. But again, if you want sharpness and contrast reduced and no saturation, and you want to do that color grading on your own, just record it in decine-alike that has the lowest contrast, sharpness, and saturation settings, and then you can adjust those in post. But I think that having the ability to have your camera and FPV system all in one here and record your 2.7K or 4K video straight to the air unit is really a hard combination to beat. And I think this is going to be the future for those of you guys that want to put builds together that are under 250 grams, where you don't need to have to worry about things like remote ID. All right, so this video is entirely way too long. I think I'll leave it to you guys to leave any questions you might have down in the comment section. I know that one of the more common questions are going to be like, how does this compare to Walksnail? Or how does this compare to, HD0? I think in order to answer that question, if you just say if your question is literally, how does it compare to Walksnail? There's almost no way for me to answer that in a comment, because it's just, the answer is just going to be too long. So try and keep it specific as much as possible. If there's a certain aspect that you want some details about, at least in my opinion about, I'll try and answer that. But if it's a very open-ended general question and if I'm not really certain what you're asking for specifically, it's probably not going to get answered. So try and be as specific as possible. And if it's something that I can answer, relatively simply, I'll do that in the comments. But if it's going to be like a rather lengthy response, I'll probably just say, okay, I will save this for the next video, because I know that there's going to be like, well, how is it compared to all these other systems and etc. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I think this is better than anything else that's out there, but obviously better is subjective. What do I mean by better? Well, I'll have to explain that in a future video, but better is subjective. So it's better for me, but what does that mean? I guess you'll have to find out in the next video. So links are going to be down in the video description for everything. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.